I was 12 years old when it happened. At that age, the world was still simple, defined by the boundaries of my small suburban town and the comforts of my bedroom. It was a warm summer afternoon, and the sun filtered through the blinds, casting lazy stripes of light across the room. I sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully organizing my marble collection, a prized possession among the few I held dear. My marbles were special, each one unique, colorful, and polished to a sheen. I had spent months gathering them, trading with Joey and other kids at school, always on the lookout for rare pieces. The tiger's eye was my favorite. It gleamed with golden hues, swirling inside the glass like a tiny galaxy. I was admiring it when it slipped from my fingers, rolling under the bed. Without thinking, I reached under the bed, groping in the dusty darkness for the smooth surface of the marble. My hand brushed against something soft and cold. For a moment, I thought it was just a misplaced sock, but then I felt it again, cold, clammy, unmistakably human. My breath caught in my throat, and I yanked my hand back as if burned. The next few moments blurred together. I remember backing into the corner of my room, my heart pounding in my chest. I was shaking, my eyes locked on the space beneath the bed. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually, my curiosity overcame my fear. I had to know what it was. Slowly, I crouched down on all fours and lowered my face to the floor. The air under the bed felt unnaturally cold, and for a moment, I hesitated. Then, through the shadows, I saw them eyes. Pale blue, more vivid than anything I'd ever seen. They were wide open, staring straight at me. A chill crawled up my spine as I scrambled backward, my mind reeling. I didn't understand what I had seen, what I could have seen. It wasn't possible for someone to be under my bed. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe just my imagination running wild. But those eyes... I couldn't shake the image. I bolted out of my room and found my dad in the living room, reading the newspaper. He looked up from behind his reading glasses, his expression stern as usual. "What's the matter with you?" he asked, his voice as gruff as ever. There's someone under my bed," I stammered, feeling foolish even as I said it out loud. My dad frowned, clearly unimpressed. "Don't be ridiculous." "There's nobody under your bed," he said, folding the newspaper and standing up. I knew better than to argue with him, but the fear was still gripping me tight. My dad marched down the hall, and I followed, feeling a strange mix of dread and relief. When we reached my room, he threw open the door and flicked on the light. "See," he said as he knelt down, lifting the edge of the bed. "Nothing." He gestured at the empty space, and I felt my stomach twist. There was no one there. No eyes. No cold hand. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent my heart racing. I lay in bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, trying to convince myself it had all been a hallucination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The feeling of those eyes on me lingered, even when I closed my own. Over the next few days, I tried to go back to normal. I went to school, played with Joey after class, and pretended like nothing had happened. But every night, the fear crept back in. I could still feel that cold hand, still see those piercing blue eyes in the shadows. I told Joey about it once during lunch, but he just laughed it off, calling it cool and suggesting I had a ghost haunting me. He was always into stuff like that, ghosts, monsters, aliens. To him, It was exciting. To me, it was terrifying. The dreams started about a week later. At first, they were vague, just flashes of those blue eyes staring at me from the darkness. But then they got worse. In one dream, I was standing in the middle of a dense, foggy forest. The trees loomed tall and twisted, their branches like skeletal arms reaching toward me. I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. I ran through the woods, my heart pounding, branches scratching at my skin, but I couldn't escape. The eyes were always there, watching me from the shadows. Every morning, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I told myself they were just dreams, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched lingered, even when I was awake. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw flashes of blue. I'd turn my head quickly, only to find nothing there. It wasn't long before the dreams started affecting my days. I was tired all the time, struggling to stay awake in class. My grades were slipping, and even Joey noticed something was wrong. "You look like a zombie, man," he said one afternoon as we sat on the swings at the park. I shrugged, not knowing what to say. How could I explain it to him? How could I make him understand what I was going through? One night, after another restless sleep, I woke up and saw her. She was standing at the foot of my bed, a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her hair stringy and matted. She wore a dirty, torn dress, and her skin was a sickly shade of gray. Her eyes, those same icy blue eyes, were fixed on me, filled with a sadness that made my chest tighten. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, though it could only have been a few seconds. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the door. But instead of opening it, she passed right through the wood, disappearing into the hallway. I finally found the strength to move, sitting up in bed, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, too scared to close my eyes, too scared to even blink. When morning came, I tried to convince myself it was just another nightmare, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. She was real. She was here. That day, I begged my mom to let me sleep in her room. "Please, Mom, there's something in my room," I pleaded, my voice shaking. But she just gave me a sad smile and brushed my hair out of my face. "You're just having bad dreams, sweetie," she said softly. "It'll pass." But it didn't pass. The dreams got worse, more vivid. I started seeing her everywhere, in the mirror when I brushed my teeth, in the reflection of windows as I walked past. At school, I could feel her presence lurking just behind me, watching, waiting. I was losing control, slipping further into the terror that consumed me. One afternoon, I was sitting in my room, trying to do my homework when the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like something rotting in the back of the fridge, but it grew stronger, more pungent, until I couldn't ignore it. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve, trying to find the source. It was coming from under the bed. My hands shook as I lifted the blanket, my heart pounding in my chest. The smell was overwhelming now, making my eyes water. And then I saw it, her body. It was the woman, but she was no longer standing. She lay under the bed, her skin gray and mottled, her clothes stained with dirt and blood. Her eyes were closed, but her mouth was twisted in a silent scream. I backed away, stumbling into the wall. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The smell, the sight of her decaying body, it was too much. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at her lifeless form, but eventually, I ran. I burst out of the room, nearly knocking over Jill, who had been walking down the hall. "What's wrong with you?" she snapped, but I didn't answer. I just kept running, out of the house, down the street, until I couldn't run anymore. That night, I refused to go back to my room. I slept on the couch, curled up under a blanket, hoping, praying, that she wouldn't follow me. But deep down, I knew she would. She always did. The next few days were a blur. I avoided my room at all costs, spending most of my time outside or at Joey's house. But the dreams followed me. No matter where I was, I could feel her presence, always lurking just out of sight. One evening, my dad finally noticed something was off. "Why aren't you sleeping in your room?" he asked, his tone more annoyed than concerned. "I can't," I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "There's something in there." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Enough of this nonsense," he snapped. "You're too old to be scared of the dark. Tomorrow, we're going in there, and I'm going to show you there's nothing to be afraid of." I didn't argue. What was the point? He wouldn't believe me anyway. The next day, my dad marched into my room, his face set in a grim expression. "All right," he said, throwing open the closet doors, checking behind the curtains. "See?" "Nothing." He looked at me expectantly, but I didn't move. "Check under the bed," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He huffed, clearly irritated, but knelt down to humor me. I watched as his expression changed, his face going pale. "What the hell?" he muttered, backing away quickly. I didn't need to look. I already knew what he had seen. That night, we left the house. My dad didn't say much, just packed a bag and told my mom we were going to stay at a hotel for a few days. She didn't ask questions. Maybe she could sense the fear in his voice, the same fear that had been consuming me for weeks. But even in the hotel, I couldn't escape her. She followed me into my dreams, into my thoughts, into every shadow that crossed my path. There was no running from her, no hiding. She was a part of me now, and I didn't know how to make her go away. Eventually, we moved. My parents said it was because my dad got a new job, but I knew the truth. They didn't want to stay in that house any more than I did. We left everything behind, the house, the memories, the nightmares. But even now, years later, I can still feel her. Every once in a while, I catch a glimpse of those pale blue eyes, watching me from the corner of a room, from the reflection in a window. I tell myself it's just my imagination, that I'm overreacting. But deep down, I know she's still with me. She'll always be with me.